Hello and welcome to Introvert in Business, a podcast by me, John Baker, that will help you activate your introvert, unlocking the introvert superpowers within your business so that you can more confidently sell and network, that you can unleash more creativity and improve your business performance so that you get a better business.
In today's podcast, we're looking at business development, which is something that many introverts worry about. They don't particularly like networking, which is seen as a good way of business development, and they often don't like selling. Now, the interesting thing is that many accountants are perceived to be, not always are, but are often perceived to be introverts. So who better than to interview a reformed accountant who helps accountants to dramatically grow their business? I'm very pleased to be talking to Mark Lee. Mark is a speaker and a mentor for accountants, helping them to get amazing business growth. He's also the treasurer for the Magic Circle. And just before we start, if you want to get in touch to go into any of the subjects covered in more detail, please feel free. My details are on the podcast, and equally, if you'd like me to speak at your conference or work with your team to help improve productivity, creativity and profitability within your firm, I'd love to speak to you.
Welcome, Mark.
Thanks very much for having me, John.
Where would you call yourself? Extremely introvert, extremely extrovert, or somewhere else?
I suspect when I was younger, I would definitely have been described and felt that I was an extrovert. As I've got older and matured, evolved maybe, I've learned that not everybody likes the people who prefer to be the life and soul of the party. So I've tended to calm myself down, to listen much more intently and deliberately than I ever did when I was younger, and to accept that I don't have to be the life and soul of every party. And I'm quite happy not doing that.
That's a really interesting personal development path, and I think that's something which lots of us sometimes need to have, that kind of reflection that you've just said, which is I don't need to do things or that I do, and I don't need to worry about things that I don't do as much.
I was never the archetypal accountant, and that's probably why my career progressed as well as it did, and I became press spokesperson for a number of accountancy firms I worked for, chairman of the tax faculty of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, not because I was great at tax or accounting, but because I could communicate complex concepts more effectively than many of my colleagues. And my brain wasn't big enough to understand everything, I think, so I had to bring things down to simplify them, and that enabled me to be a better communicator.
That's actually quite interesting, Mark, because I was going to go on to say, what do you do to help accountants be more successful? But you almost touched on something which perhaps some accountants don't do. You said that you can simplify things that are more complex and put them across more clearly. Is that something, therefore, that's missing in many accountants?
It is. It's the tendency to go with jargon, which we can all do, and we need to move away from, because that's not helping clients. Networking is particularly relevant when it comes to helping clients who want to generate more business. A lot of people who tend to be more introverted don't like networking, perhaps because they feel that they would be expected to talk a lot about themselves. And actually, as you and I know, the most effective networkers are those who are better at listening and reflecting back what they're hearing. You don't have to be happy to talk with strangers, and those of us who have got over what we were told by our parents, never talk to strangers. When you remember that's why you might have this fear of enjoying a networking event and listening to the people you're talking to, and then following up effectively as well, you will be more successful, whether you feel that you're introverted or not. Experts tend to talk too much about themselves, and it's something, as I say, I've learned to resist doing, other than when I'm being interviewed like this.
So one area that you work with accountants is networking. As you said, it's a great way to get clients, and almost your tip there is about listening rather than talking, whereas everyone seems to assume that networking is going about and talking. What you're saying is a better style is to listen rather than talk, and then reflect back.
Absolutely.
So that the person knows that they were being listened to.
Exactly. And then people like people who are interested in them. Yeah. And you don't have to be interesting yourself, but you have to be interested in other people and be able to evidence the fact that you're able to provide the solution and the services that they require. But that can follow afterwards when they're asking you questions rather than you having to open up and talk about yourself in great detail.
So that might lead on to the next question I'm going to ask you, but I did like that phrase, do you have to be interesting or interested? And I think that's a really, really powerful point. So what you just said, Mark, is that there's the networking part where you start to get to know people, and then there's a part where perhaps they're interested in your services, and that might be something that many of us would call selling. Again, one of those things that lots of people assume extroverts are great at and introverts aren't. What would your tip be if you were talking to some perhaps quiet, introverted accountants? How would you help them to sell more?
Well, the first thing I do is point out that we tend not to like the extrovert salespeople. They tend to be the archetypal double glazing or second-hand car salespeople that we're really thinking about there. The best salespeople are those who aren't selling. They're just trying to help their customers or their clients. And you can only do that if you've asked the right questions in order to know what it is you can do that will provide help to prospective customers or clients. So again, it comes down to perhaps having a structured approach to this. You don't have to commit everything to memory, whether you're doing it over the phone or at an initial meeting, to know what information you will need in order to know whether or not you can help the person. Because if you can't provide the help they need, there is no point wasting time trying to sell something to them that they don't really want.
Think about good salespeople rather than bad salespeople. Whereas, as you said, lots of people think of the archetypal double glazing salesman, but think about good salespeople that you've listened to who ask questions. You then said something about structure, Mark. How might that work? Structured questions.
Well, one of the things that I often find the accountants I work with do is they haven't really thought about what information they need in order to know whether or not they are going to be able to help the client and whether or not the client's going to be prepared to pay the sort of fee that they want for the services that they provide. So structuring your questions means thinking about what background information do you need in terms of the client and the services that they require. What experiences have they had with other accountants that they liked or didn't like? What might they like to be different? And what do they like about the way that accountants work with them? And to what extent does that match with how you like working with clients? And then thinking about what questions you need to ask about the organization or about their affairs or about the complexity or simplicity of the affairs, the number of transactions perhaps, number of bank accounts. There's all sorts of detailed questions. And then finally you get to the fees question, which is the level of fee that you're going to charge and the terms on which you're going to charge it, and talking about your fees in a way that gives the clients a choice, they could say yes or no, or you can give them a choice of different service levels at different fees.
Apologies, Mark, the internet died a little bit there, but you were talking about focus on the information that you need, things like how do you discover if you can help the other person, and how do you discover if they can afford to pay the fees you like. I particularly like the point that you were starting to make, which is don't give them a binary choice. This is the fee, can you pay it, yes or no, but give them something wider than that. So there's a range of different perhaps offers.
Having found out what they think they want and need, it can be helpful to offer 3 levels of service. The cheapest one, the middle one, and the higher one. Now that doesn't work in all situations. The point is, over a period of time, you can learn what works for you and what works for the people you're dealing with. When I catch my thought again, you can give them a choice. Over a period of time, you may no longer need to have a crib sheet in front of you. Certainly when I'm talking to accountants who might want me to mentor them or to join one of my master classes, I've done it so often now, I've had the conversation so often, I can do it almost on autopilot. But many of the accountants I work with, it takes a while to get to that stage and to have that level of confidence, because every conversation you have with everybody you deal with is different, because some of them are introverts and some of them are extroverts, if for no other reason.
So we've been very much focusing on what are some of the perceived weaknesses of introverts, things that they talk about, like they don't like networking and they don't like selling. You've given us some great ideas there to help Mark. One of the interesting things you just pointed out, which is absolutely right, you might be having a conversation with another introvert. In other words, you're selling to an introvert. Do you see that conversation go differently anyway? Have you got any tips that might help there?
I am told that there are different ways of engaging people who are introverted or extroverted. I slow down my speech if I'm talking to somebody who speaks at a slower pace than me, because that probably means they are introverted and more cerebral, if you like. They think more carefully before they speak. So I'm trying to reflect that by doing the same. And I suspect that I've slowed down in my answer to this question than to some of my earlier ones.
Brilliant. Love it. And you're absolutely right, because introverts, well, in the jargon, it's called internal processing. And they will tend to stop, think inside their head before coming out with an answer, whereas a stereotypical, which of course never really exists, extrovert will do it the other way around. They almost bounce stuff out of their head in order to think, which leads me to the phrase which I talk about a lot, which is, do you talk to think or think to talk?
Oh, I like that.
If I said, summarize your top tips for quieter accountants or quieter business people to improve their business.
Okay. Embrace your personality. Don't pretend to be something or someone different to who you are. Think about how you can reflect back to people what you've heard them say and why that interests you, and talk about other clients that you have who are similar to them, both in terms of being introverted or extroverted, but also in terms of their issues, challenges and problems. Because if you do that, they will find you more interesting and potentially be more interested in you as well.
Oh, I love that. Thanks, Mark. That was a really good summary. And what struck me so much about your 3 points there was that none of them were doing the typical extrovert thing of talking and showing off.
No.
Which is brilliant. Mark, you are a superstar. Thank you very much. If any of the people listening to this wanted to get hold of you, what would they do?
Thank you. Well, you can find me online everywhere. I'm Bookmark Lee, because my name, Mark Lee, is so common. So it's BOOKMARKLEE. That's my website, .co.uk, LinkedIn and Twitter.
Brilliant. Mark, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you, John.